"You don't belong in this part of town, soldier boy." Owen Blackwell's military-issue duffel bag hit the pavement as Rex Malone shoved him backward against his parked truck, the midday sun glinting off the chrome skulls, decorating the biker's leather jacket. Two more bikers flanked him, their boots scraping concrete as they moved to block any escape route through the nearly empty parking lot. Malone's laugh was ugly and sharp. "Think that army surplus store uniform makes you tough?" Owen's eyes tracked each man's position automatically. Muscle memory from deployments these weekend warriors couldn't pronounce. His voice stayed calm, almost gentle. "You really don't want to do this." The bikers exchanged glances and grinned wider, mistaking his restraint for fear, never suspecting they were seconds away from discovering what a decorated Navy SEAL looked like when the gloves came off. Welcome to Frost Folk Tales. This is where we tell the stories of those who were underestimated, dismissed, and targeted, yet chose courage over silence. If these stories move you, subscribe and be part of a community that refuses to let them fade into the background. 30 minutes earlier, Owen Blackwell had simply needed groceries. After 18 months in the sand and heat of classified operations, all he wanted was to grab some supplies and continue the drive home to his apartment in Virginia Beach. The small-town grocery store sat off Highway 58, its parking lot baking under the Virginia afternoon sun. Owen stepped out of his pickup truck, wearing his green military utility top and dark blue cargo pants, the fabric crisp and clean despite the long drive. His movements carried the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, shoulders square but relaxed, eyes automatically scanning his surroundings out of habit rather than fear. The Harley-Davidson motorcycles lined up near the store entrance should have been his first warning. 3 black and chrome machines with Iron Wolves patches visible on their leather saddlebags, parked with the casual arrogance of men who believed they owned whatever space they occupied. But Owen had encountered bikers before, most of them decent people who simply enjoyed riding. He grabbed his wallet from the truck's center console and headed toward the store, his military-issue boots silent on the asphalt despite his 6'2" frame. Rex Malone emerged from the grocery store first, his massive bulk straining against a black leather vest, adorned with patches proclaiming his status as Iron Wolves president. His arms, thick with prison tattoos and years of steroid abuse, swung at his sides as he spotted Owen crossing the parking lot. Behind him came Tommy Nash, the gang's lieutenant, wearing a sleeveless denim jacket over his pale, scarred torso, and Marvin Cruz, whose nervous energy and darting eyes suggested either drugs or cowardice, possibly both. All three wore the same expression as they noticed Owen, the predatory interest of bullies who believed they'd found easy prey. "Look what we got here, boys." Rex's voice carried the rough rasp of a lifetime smoker as he stepped directly into Owen's path. The other 2 bikers spread out slightly, a practiced movement that spoke to experience intimidating lone targets. Rex's pale blue eyes held the cold calculation of a man accustomed to violence, scanning Owen from head to toe like a butcher sizing up meat. "Fresh out of basic training, soldier boy? That uniform's so clean you probably bought it at a thrift store." Owen stopped walking, but didn't step back, his dark eyes meeting Rex's stare without challenge or submission. His posture remained relaxed, hands loose at his sides, but something in his bearing made Rex's Lieutenant Tommy Nash shift uncomfortably. "Excuse me," Owen said quietly, his tone carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "I'm just here to buy groceries." The dismissal in Owen's voice, the complete lack of fear or deference, struck Rex Malone like a physical blow. Men didn't ignore Rex Malone, especially not some uniformed nobody who looked like he'd never seen real combat. Rex stepped closer, his bulk casting a shadow over Owen's face, close enough that Owen could smell the stale beer and cigarettes on his breath. "This parking lot belongs to the Iron Wolves when we're here, boy. Maybe you should find somewhere else to shop." Owen's assessment of the 3 men was automatic and thorough. Rex Malone, approximately 50 years old, 6'4" and 280 pounds, strong but carrying too much weight around his midsection, likely relied on intimidation and overwhelming force rather than skill. Tommy Nash, younger and leaner, tattoos suggesting prison time, probably quick with a knife but lacking real combat training. Marvin Cruz, nervous and unpredictable, the type who might escalate suddenly but would break quickly under pressure. All three positioned to prevent retreat, but bunched too closely together, making them vulnerable to someone with proper training. "I'm not looking for trouble," Owen replied, his voice carrying the same measured calm. "But I'm not leaving either." The words hung in the afternoon air like a challenge, though Owen's tone suggested he was simply stating facts. His military bearing, the way he held himself with quiet confidence, despite being outnumbered, began to irritate Rex Malone in ways the biker leader couldn't fully articulate. Rex's face flushed red above his graying beard. "You think you're better than us, don't you? Think that uniform makes you special?" His voice rose, drawing attention from the few other people in the parking lot. An elderly woman pushing a grocery cart toward her sedan slowed her steps, watching nervously. Inside the store, manager Nolan Burke noticed the confrontation developing and reached for his phone. "You military types are all the same, thinking you're heroes when you're nothing but government attack dogs." Owen's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a hardening that suggested Rex Malone was treading on dangerous ground. The insult to his service, to the men and women he'd served alongside, to those who hadn't made it home, settled in his chest like a cold weight. Still, his training held. De-escalation remained the preferred option. "You have your opinions," Owen said quietly. "I respect your right to them. Now if you'll excuse me." He took a step toward the store entrance, not retreating, but simply continuing his original path. Rex Malone's massive hand slammed into Owen's chest, stopping his forward progress with a meaty thud. The contact was deliberately aggressive, designed to provoke a reaction that would justify whatever violence Rex had already decided to unleash. "Where you think you're going, boy?" Rex's voice carried the ugly edge of a man whose authority had been questioned. Tommy Nash moved closer to Owen's left side, while Marvin Cruz circled right. Their practiced positioning, revealing this wasn't their first time surrounding a lone victim. The parking lot felt suddenly smaller, the afternoon sun bearing down like a spotlight on the developing confrontation. Owen looked down at the hand pressed against his chest, then back up at Rex Malone's face. His voice remained perfectly calm, but something in his tone suggested a line had been crossed. "Remove your hand, please." The please wasn't politeness. It was a final courtesy, a last opportunity for Rex Malone to recognize the mistake he was making and step back from consequences he couldn't imagine. But Rex heard only weakness in Owen's restraint, seeing the calm request as submission rather than the warning it actually was. "Or what, soldier boy?" Rex pressed harder, his palm shoving Owen back against the pickup truck's door. "You gonna cry to your commanding officer? Tell him the mean bikers hurt your feelings?" Tommy Nash and Marvin Cruz laughed, the sound harsh and mocking in the afternoon heat. Owen's back touched the truck's warm metal, but his posture never changed. He didn't push back against Rex's hand or attempt to break free. Instead, he simply waited, his dark eyes studying the three men with the clinical detachment of a professional evaluating targets. His breathing remained steady, his muscles loose and ready. Somewhere in the back of his mind, tactical assessments ran automatically. Distance to cover, available improvised weapons, threat priority, exit strategies. The elderly woman with the grocery cart had stopped entirely now, her weathered hands gripping the cart's handle as she watched the confrontation unfold. Through the store's large windows, manager Nolan Burke spoke urgently into his phone while other customers pressed closer to the glass. The scene had all the hallmarks of violence about to erupt. Three large bikers intimidating a lone man in military uniform, but they couldn't see what Owen saw. They couldn't recognize the way he held himself, the careful balance between alertness and relaxation that marked a warrior at rest. They missed the way his eyes tracked movement without moving his head, the unconscious cataloging of threats and opportunities that never stopped running in the background of his mind. Rex Malone leaned closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper meant for Owen's ears alone. "Know what we do to uppity soldiers in this town? We teach them some respect, some humility." His breath was hot against Owen's face, carrying threats that had probably worked on countless other victims. But Owen Blackwell wasn't countless other victims. Owen's response came in the same quiet tone he'd maintained throughout the encounter. But now it carried an edge that made Tommy Nash take an unconscious half-step backward. "I'm going to give you one last warning. Walk away. All of you." right now." The words weren't loud or aggressive, but something in Owen's delivery made the hair on the back of Rex Malone's neck stand up. For just a moment, doubt flickered across the biker leader's face. This wasn't how intimidation usually worked. Victims begged or argued or tried to negotiate. They didn't issue warnings with the quiet certainty of men who knew exactly what they were capable of. But Rex had an audience now. His reputation, his leadership of the Iron Wolves, his entire identity was built on never backing down from anyone, especially not some clean-cut soldier who probably spent his military service filing paperwork in an air-conditioned office. The moment of doubt passed, replaced by the familiar anger that had carried him through decades of violence. Rex's free hand curled into a fist the size of a sledgehammer. "Last warning?" he snarled, loud enough for his men to hear. "You're about to learn what a real warning looks like, boy." Owen saw the punch coming before Rex even decided to throw it, reading the telltale tension in the biker's shoulders and the shift in his weight. Time seemed to slow as 18 years of elite military training awakened like a sleeping predator opening its eyes. The calm, polite man who'd simply wanted to buy groceries began to fade, replaced by something far more dangerous. The fist started its journey toward Owen's face, carrying behind it all of Rex Malone's bulk and fury. But Rex Malone had just made the worst mistake of his life. He'd chosen to start a fight with a decorated Navy SEAL commander who'd spent nearly 2 decades learning exactly how to end them. Rex Malone's fist cut through the afternoon air like a sledgehammer, aimed directly at Owen Blackwell's jaw. But the punch that should have connected with devastating force met only empty space. Owen had shifted his weight almost imperceptibly, his body moving with the fluid grace of water flowing around a stone. Rex's momentum carried him forward, off balance, confused by the sudden absence of his target. The transformation in Owen Blackwell was instantaneous and terrifying. Gone was the calm, measured man who had been trying to defuse the situation. In his place stood a predator whose every instinct had been honed by years of the most brutal training the military could devise. His eyes, which moments before had held patience and restraint, now burned with the cold fire of controlled violence. Rex stumbled, trying to recover from his missed swing, but Owen was already moving. His left hand shot out with surgical precision, fingers finding the exact pressure point on Rex's wrist that sent lightning bolts of pain up his arm. Rex's hand opened involuntarily, his grip on his motorcycle chain loosening as his fingers went numb. Tommy Nash, Rex's lieutenant, saw his leader stagger and rushed forward with a roar of rage. The biker was a mountain of muscle, wrapped in leather and denim, his green tank top stretched tight across his massive chest. He swung a meaty fist toward Owen's ribs, confident that his size advantage would end this quickly. Owen ducked under the punch with fluid grace, his body moving like a dancer, but with the deadly purpose of a shark. As Tommy's fist sailed harmlessly over his head, Owen rose up behind the punch, his right elbow finding the sweet spot just below Tommy's shoulder joint. The impact was precise and devastating. The sound of Tommy's shoulder dislocating was audible even over the ambient noise of the parking lot. It was a wet pop, followed immediately by a scream of agony that echoed off the grocery store's walls. Tommy dropped to his knees, his left arm hanging at an unnatural angle, his face twisted in shock and pain. Inside the grocery store, Nolan Burke pressed his face against the large windows, his orange polo shirt damp with nervous sweat. The middle-aged store manager fumbled for his phone with shaking hands, his eyes wide with disbelief as he watched the confrontation unfold. He had seen plenty of parking lot arguments in his 15 years managing the store, but nothing like this. "Mrs. Pickford, get away from the window," Nolan called to the elderly woman in her blue jacket who stood frozen near the entrance, watching the violence with horrified fascination. But Mrs. Gladys Pickford couldn't look away. In her 78 years, she had never witnessed anything like the controlled violence being displayed in the parking lot. The black man they had been threatening wasn't fighting like a street brawler or an angry customer. His movements were deliberate, calculated, professional. Marvin Cruz, the third member of the Iron Wolves, had been hanging back, thinking his presence was merely psychological support for what should have been a quick intimidation. But seeing Tommy writhing on the asphalt and Rex clutching his numb wrist, Marvin realized the situation had gone horribly wrong. He reached for the knife, clipped to his belt, his hands trembling slightly as the reality of their miscalculation began to sink in. But Owen's peripheral vision caught the movement, and he turned his attention to the third attacker with the same cold efficiency he had shown the others. "Don't," Owen said quietly, his voice carrying a weight of authority that made Marvin's blood run cold. "You're already in enough trouble." But fear and adrenaline had taken control of Marvin's decision-making. He pulled the blade free and lunged forward, the 4-inch steel gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. It was a clumsy, desperate attack, born of panic rather than skill. Owen sidestepped the knife thrust with minimal effort, his left hand shooting out to grab Marvin's wrist, while his right found a cluster of pressure points along the biker's neck. Marvin's eyes rolled back as Owen applied precise pressure to the carotid artery, cutting off blood flow to his brain for exactly 3 seconds. Marvin's knife clattered to the asphalt as his legs buckled. He remained conscious but completely disoriented, his body no longer responding to his commands as he sank to the ground in a confused heap. Rex Malone, still fighting through the numbness in his right hand, pulled a telescoping baton from his jacket with his left. His face was red with rage and humiliation as he extended the weapon with a sharp metallic click. "You think you're some kind of tough guy?" Rex snarled, spittle flying from his lips. "I've been dealing with punks like you for 20 years. Owen's response was a slight smile that never reached his eyes. "No, Rex, you really haven't." Rex charged forward, swinging the baton in a wide arc, intended to crack Owen's skull. But Owen was no longer where the weapon expected to find him. He had moved inside Rex's reach, his body pressed close to the biker's chest, making the baton useless. Owen's right hand found Rex's solar plexus, delivering a precise strike that drove every molecule of air from the gang leader's lungs. Rex's eyes bulged as his diaphragm spasmed, his body desperately trying to draw breath that wouldn't come. As Rex doubled over, gasping like a fish out of water, Owen's left hand found the pressure point behind his ear. Rex's legs turned to rubber, and he collapsed to the asphalt, conscious but completely helpless as his respiratory system struggled to function. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 90 seconds. Owen Blackwell stood in the center of the 3 defeated bikers, his breathing steady and controlled. His clothes weren't even disheveled, his green polo shirt still neatly tucked into his jeans. There was no swagger in his posture, no celebration of victory. He simply stood ready, alert, scanning for additional threats while keeping one eye on his fallen attackers. Inside the store, Nolan Burke's hands shook as he spoke to the 911 operator. "3 men attacked a customer in our parking lot," he said, his voice cracking with adrenaline. "But sir, I think you need to send multiple units. The customer, he's done something to all 3 of them." Mrs. Gladys Pickford moved closer to the window, her blue jacket pressed against the glass as she studied Owen's face. There was no rage there, no satisfaction at having hurt other human beings. Instead, she saw something that reminded her of her late husband, who had served in Korea. It was the look of a professional who had done what was necessary without taking any pleasure in it. Tommy Nash tried to stand, cradling his dislocated shoulder, but the pain sent waves of nausea through his body. He looked up at Owen with a mixture of fear and confusion, finally understanding that they had made a terrible mistake. "What are you, man?" Tommy gasped through gritted teeth. Owen's response was quiet, but carried clearly across the parking lot. "I'm someone who was trying to avoid this." Rex Malone managed to get enough air into his lungs to speak, though his voice came out as a wheeze. "This isn't over," he threatened, but the words lacked conviction. He was still trying to process how quickly and efficiently he had been neutralized. Owen looked down at the gang leader with something approaching pity. "Yes, Rex, it is." Marvin Cruz was slowly regaining control of his motor functions, but he made no attempt to stand or continue the fight. He had seen enough to know that any further aggression would only result in more pain and humiliation. The sound of approaching sirens began to filter through the afternoon air, still distant but growing closer. Owen turned his attention toward the store, making eye contact with the manager and elderly woman who had witnessed the confrontation. He raised one hand in a small gesture of acknowledgement, letting them know he was aware of their presence and grateful for their call to authorities. The three iron wolves lay scattered across the asphalt like broken toys, their leather jackets and tough guy posturing revealed as nothing more than costume and theater. Their motorcycles sat nearby, silent chrome monuments to the swagger that had evaporated in less than 2 minutes of contact with a real warrior. Owen Blackwell checked his watch, calculating how long it would be before law enforcement arrived. He had no intention of leaving the scene, no desire to avoid explaining what had happened. His military training had taught him that accountability was as important as capability. The afternoon sun continued to shine down on the grocery store parking lot, illuminating a scene that would be talked about for years to come. Three men who had thought they understood violence had learned the difference between intimidation and actual combat skill, and one decorated Navy SEAL commander stood quietly among them, waiting for the police to arrive so he could explain how a simple grocery stop had turned into a masterclass in special operations training. The Iron Wolves had picked the wrong target, and now they would face the consequences of their miscalculation. The wail of police sirens pierced through the afternoon air, growing louder as 3 squad cars converged on the grocery store parking lot. Owen Blackwell remained standing calmly beside his rental car, his hands visible and relaxed at his sides, while Rex Malone writhed on the asphalt, clutching his ribs. Tommy Nash sat against a motorcycle holding his dislocated shoulder, and Marvin Cruz lay motionless but breathing heavily near the store entrance. Detective Rosa Figueroa stepped out of the lead vehicle, her red blouse crisp under her dark blue jacket despite the afternoon heat. 2 uniformed officers in short-sleeved blue shirts flanked her as she surveyed the scene. Her experienced eyes took in the 3 incapacitated bikers, their scattered motorcycles, and the composed black man standing amid the chaos without a scratch on him. "What happened here?" Detective Figueroa called out, her hand instinctively resting near her service weapon as she approached. The scene defied logic. 3 large bikers down, 1 man standing. Either she was looking at the luckiest man alive, or something far more complex had occurred. Rex Malone struggled to his feet, gasping and pointing an accusatory finger at Owen Blackwell. "Officer, thank God you're here. This maniac attacked us for no reason. We were just minding our own business when he went crazy on us. Look at us. Look what he did." Tommy Nash nodded vigorously despite his obvious pain. "That's right, Detective. We were just talking to him friendly-like, and he exploded, nearly killed us all. I think my shoulder's broken." Detective Figueroa's eyebrows raised skeptically. She'd seen plenty of bar fights and parking lot brawls in her 15 years on the force, but this didn't fit the typical pattern. 3 bikers claiming victimhood while showing clear signs of being systematically defeated suggested either a very different story or a very different kind of opponent. "Sir, I'm Detective Rosa Figueroa. I need you to step away from the vehicle and keep your hands where I can see them," she instructed Owen Blackwell, her tone professional but cautious. Owen Blackwell complied immediately, taking 2 measured steps away from his car and clasping his hands behind his back in a relaxed military posture. "Yes, ma'am. I understand you need to assess the situation. I'm fully cooperative." His calm compliance and respectful tone surprised Detective Figueroa. Most men involved in violent altercations showed signs of adrenaline, agitation, or defensive posturing. This man displayed the controlled composure of someone accustomed to high-stress situations. "He's lying," Rex Malone shouted, still clutching his midsection. "We didn't do nothing to him. He just started throwing punches like some kind of trained killer. We're the victims here." Before Detective Figueroa could respond, the grocery store's automatic doors slid open. Nolan Burke, the store manager, hurried outside, wearing his standard green polo shirt and blue jacket, followed closely by Mrs. Gladys Pickford in her characteristic blue jacket over a floral dress. "Detective, I saw the whole thing," Nolan Burke called out urgently. "These bikers were threatening that gentleman, using racial slurs and blocking him from leaving. They started the fight." Mrs. Gladys Pickford nodded emphatically, her weathered hands gripping her purse tightly. "I was coming out of the store when I heard them shouting terrible things at that nice young man. They were saying horrible racist things and trying to intimidate him. He only defended himself when they attacked first." Rex Malone's face flushed red beneath his scraggly beard. They're lying. We never said nothing racist. We were just having a conversation, and he attacked us. Detective Figueroa held up her hand for silence, her analytical mind processing the conflicting accounts. She turned to Owen Blackwell, studying his composed demeanor and noting the complete absence of defensive wounds or torn clothing that typically accompanied mutual combat. "Sir, what's your name?" she asked. "Owen Blackwell, ma'am." "Mr. Blackwell, I need your account of what happened here. Take your time and be precise." Owen Blackwell straightened slightly, his voice clear and measured. "I was loading groceries into my rental car when these three men approached me. The one identifying himself as Rex Malone made several racist remarks about my presence in their town. When I attempted to finish loading my groceries and leave, they physically blocked my path to the driver's door." "That's a damn lie," Tommy Nash interjected, grimacing as he tried to stand. Detective Figueroa shot him a sharp look. "You'll get your turn. Continue, Mr. Blackwell." Mr. Malone escalated his verbal threats to physical intimidation, stating that I needed to learn my place. When I gave them a final warning to allow me to leave peacefully, Mr. Malone threw the first punch. I defended myself using appropriate force to neutralize the threats and prevent further violence. Detective Figueroa found herself impressed by Owen Blackwell's precise language and calm recounting of events. His military bearing was unmistakable now that she focused on it. The way he stood at attention, his respectful responses, and his clinical description of the altercation all pointed to extensive military training. "Appropriate force?" she questioned, gesturing at the three incapacitated bikers. "You single-handedly defeated three grown men." "Yes, ma'am. I used the minimum force necessary to end the threat, while avoiding permanent injury to my attackers." Rex Malone struggled to his feet, swaying slightly. "He's making it sound all professional, but he beat us down like we were nothing. Nobody fights like that, unless they're some kind of psycho." Mrs. Gladys Pickford stepped forward indignantly. "That young man showed remarkable restraint. He could have hurt them much worse, but he stopped the moment they were no longer a threat. He even checked to make sure they were breathing." Detective Figueroa's curiosity intensified. The witness testimony consistently supported Owen Blackwell's version, and his demeanor suggested someone with extensive combat training. She'd dealt with plenty of street fighters and tough guys over the years, but this man carried himself differently. "Mr. Blackwell, what's your occupation?" she asked. "I'm active duty military, ma'am. Currently traveling home from deployment." "What branch and specialty?" Owen Blackwell hesitated briefly, clearly preferring to avoid attention to his service record. "United States Navy, ma'am. Special Operations." Detective Figueroa felt the pieces clicking into place. Special Operations would explain the systematic efficiency with which he'd handled three attackers. It would also explain his calm professionalism and precise language under stress. "I'm going to need to see some identification, Mr. Blackwell." Owen Blackwell reached slowly into his pocket, producing his wallet and extracting his military identification card. Detective Figueroa examined it carefully, her eyes widening as she processed the information. "Navy SEAL, Commander rank, current active status." "Commander Blackwell," she said, her tone shifting to one of professional respect. "I apologize for the initial questioning. Given your service record and the witness testimony, I believe we have a clear picture of what occurred here." Rex Malone's face contorted with rage and disbelief. "What? You're taking his word over ours just because he's got some military ID? We're American citizens too. Mr. Malone, you and your associates are facing assault charges based on multiple witness testimony that you initiated both the verbal harassment and physical violence." Detective Figueroa replied firmly. Commander Blackwell acted in self-defense. Nolan Burke approached the detective, his expression earnest. "Detective, I've never seen anything like it." Commander Blackwell tried everything to avoid the fight. He warned them multiple times, but they wouldn't listen. When they forced him to act, he was incredibly controlled and precise, and he immediately called out to ask if anyone was seriously hurt. Mrs. Gladys Pickford added, "He was ready to provide first aid to the very men who attacked him. That's real character." Detective Figueroa nodded, making notes in her pad. The evidence overwhelmingly supported a clear case of self-defense by a highly trained military professional who had shown remarkable restraint against unprovoked racist aggression. Commander Blackwell, I want to personally thank you for your service and commend your restraint in this situation. Lesser men might have caused permanent damage, but you neutralized the threats while minimizing harm to your attackers. Owen Blackwell remained humble in his response. I did what was necessary to protect myself, detective. Nothing more. Rex Malone looked around desperately as he realized the narrative slipping away from him. This is bullshit. You can't just believe him because he's military. We have rights too. You absolutely have rights, Mr. Malone. Detective Figueroa replied coolly. You have the right to remain silent, which I suggest you exercise. You also have the right to an attorney, which you're going to need for the assault and harassment charges you're facing. Tommy Nash finally managed to stand, cradling his injured shoulder. Come on, detective, look at us. How are we the bad guys when we're the ones who got hurt? Because you initiated the confrontation with racist harassment and physical aggression against a man who repeatedly tried to avoid violence, Detective Figueroa explained patiently. The fact that your victim was better trained than you anticipated doesn't make you any less guilty of assault. Owen Blackwell watched the exchange quietly, his professional bearing unchanged, despite being vindicated. Detective Figueroa found herself increasingly impressed by his humility and composure. She'd dealt with plenty of military personnel over the years, but Commander Blackwell exemplified the best qualities of professional service members. Commander, I'll need you to provide a formal statement, but I want you to know that based on the evidence and witness testimony, you're not facing any charges. You acted appropriately in defending yourself against unprovoked aggression. The detective's words carried the weight of official recognition, acknowledging both Owen Blackwell's innocence and his exemplary conduct under extreme provocation. The three bikers who had attempted to intimidate him with racist threats now faced the full consequences of their actions, while the man they had underestimated stood vindicated by the truth. Detective Rosa Figueroa stepped away from the crowd, Owen Blackwell's military identification card held carefully in her gloved hand. The afternoon sun cast sharp shadows across the grocery store parking lot as she pulled out her phone, the weight of what she'd just discovered settling over her like a heavy blanket. She'd been a detective for 12 years, had seen her share of bar fights and parking lot altercations, but something about this situation felt different. The way Owen Blackwell carried himself, the precision with which he'd handled three armed bikers, the complete absence of panic or bravado in his voice when he recounted the events, it all pointed to training far beyond what most people possessed. She dialed the number listed on Owen Blackwell's military contact information, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency despite the growing anticipation in her chest. The phone rang twice before a crisp, authoritative voice answered. Lieutenant Colonel Chester Albright, Naval Special Warfare Command. Colonel Albright, this is Detective Rosa Figueroa with the Millfield Police Department. I'm calling to verify the identity and status of one of your personnel, Owen Blackwell. There was a brief pause, and Rosa could hear the sound of papers shuffling in the background. When Lieutenant Colonel Chester Albright spoke again, his tone had shifted to one of immediate attention. Commander Blackwell? Is he all right? Has something happened? The concern in the colonel's voice was unmistakable, and Rosa felt her understanding of the situation shift another degree. He's fine, sir. He was involved in an altercation with 3 civilians. I need to verify his current status and service record for my report. Detective, you said Commander Blackwell was involved in an altercation. Can you tell me the nature of the incident? Rosa glanced back at Owen Blackwell, who stood calmly near her patrol car, his posture relaxed but alert. Even from 30 feet away, she could see the way he tracked every movement around him, the natural awareness that spoke of years of dangerous deployments. 3 bikers confronted him in a parking lot, made some racial threats, and when they escalated to physical violence, he defended himself. All 3 attackers required medical attention. Lieutenant Colonel Chester Albright's laugh was short, but filled with genuine respect. That sounds about right. Detective Figueroa, Owen Blackwell is currently a SEAL team commander with over 15 years of active service. He's recently returned from his 7th deployment to classified locations in the Middle East and Africa. His service record includes 2 Bronze Stars, a silver star, 3 purple hearts, and more commendations for valor than I can count off the top of my head. Rosa felt her eyebrows rise as she processed this information. She'd known Owen Blackwell was military the moment she'd seen his bearing, but this level of decoration suggested someone operating at the absolute pinnacle of special operations. Can you tell me more about his current status? Commander Blackwell leads SEAL Team 7, one of our most elite units. He's completed multiple high-value target operations, hostage rescues, and counterterrorism missions. Detective, the man you're speaking with, has literally saved hundreds of American lives over his career. He's scheduled to receive the Navy Cross next month for actions during his most recent deployment. Actions I can't discuss due to classification levels. The weight of this revelation settled over Rosa like a physical force. She looked across the parking lot where Rex Malone sat on a gurney, still complaining loudly to paramedic Samuel Briggs about his injuries, his voice carrying the whining tone of someone who'd expected an easy victim and found a trained killer instead. Colonel, would you characterize Commander Blackwell as someone prone to unnecessary violence? Absolutely not. Lieutenant Colonel Chester Albright's response was immediate and firm. Owen Blackwell is one of the most disciplined operators I've ever served with. His ability to assess threats and use proportional force is legendary among his peers. If he engaged in physical confrontation, I can guarantee you it was necessary and measured. He's exactly the kind of warrior you want representing America overseas, deadly when required, but always controlled and professional. Rosa thanked the colonel and ended the call, her mind reeling from the conversation. She'd been treating Owen Blackwell like any other civilian caught up in a parking lot brawl, when in reality, she was dealing with one of America's most decorated special operations commanders. The man standing by her patrol car had likely forgotten more about combat than most people would ever learn, had operated in situations that would break ordinary individuals, and had somehow maintained the quiet dignity she'd observed even while being questioned like a common criminal. Around the parking lot, word of the confrontation had spread through the small town's efficient gossip network. Store manager Nolan Burke stood near the grocery store entrance, answering questions from a growing crowd of curious residents who'd heard about the incident on police scanners and social media. Mrs. Gladys Pickford had positioned herself as an unofficial spokesperson, her elderly voice carrying clearly across the asphalt as she described Owen Blackwell's restraint and professionalism to anyone who would listen. That young man showed more class in 5 minutes than these bikers have shown in their entire lives, Mrs. Gladys Pickford declared to a cluster of neighbors. He tried to walk away multiple times before they forced his hand. When that awful Rex Malone started using those terrible words, I thought for sure we were going to see someone get badly hurt. Instead, that commander just handled the situation like a professional. Rosa watched the crowd dynamics with interest. Small towns had their own rhythm of information flow, and she could see the narrative forming in real time. The initial shock of the violence was giving way to curiosity about Owen Blackwell, especially as details of his military service began to circulate. Someone had apparently Googled Navy SEALs on their phone and was explaining the selection process and training requirements to an increasingly impressed audience. Meanwhile, Rex Malone's situation was deteriorating rapidly. What had started as his attempt to spin the story as an unprovoked attack was crumbling under the weight of witness testimony and physical evidence. His leather vest bore the Iron Wolves insignia that several officers recognized from gang intelligence bulletins, and his loud complaints about police bias were falling on increasingly deaf ears as his prior arrest record began surfacing in the department database. Paramedic Samuel Briggs finished treating the minor injuries Rex Malone had sustained, his professional demeanor hiding what Rosa suspected was a complete lack of sympathy for the biker's situation. She'd worked with Samuel Briggs on dozens of cases, and his usual bedside manner was notably absent as he packed up his medical supplies with brisk efficiency. Tommy Nash and Marvin Cruz sat handcuffed in the back of separate patrol cars, their earlier bravado completely evaporated. Both men sported injuries that would heal within days: dislocated shoulder, bruised ribs, minor contusions, but their expressions suggested damage to their egos that would last considerably longer. They'd approached what they thought was an easy target, and instead encountered a level of skill that had dismantled their assumptions about power and intimidation with surgical precision. Rosa walked back toward Owen Blackwell, her entire approach to the situation transformed by her conversation with Lieutenant Colonel Chester Albright. She could see him tracking her movement, his dark eyes alert but calm, hands relaxed at his sides despite the chaos swirling around him. Everything about his posture spoke of someone accustomed to command, comfortable with responsibility, and utterly unintimidated by the bureaucratic machinery of civilian law enforcement. "Commander Blackwell," she said, the title feeling appropriate now that she understood his true status. "I apologize for the earlier questioning. I spoke with Lieutenant Colonel Chester Albright, and he provided me with some context about your service record." Owen Blackwell's expression didn't change, but she caught a slight nod of acknowledgement. "Colonel Albright is a good man. I hope he wasn't concerned about the situation. He was concerned about you, which tells me something about the kind of leader you are." Rosa handed him back his military identification, noting how he secured it with the same careful attention he seemed to pay to everything else. "He also told me about your decorations and your current command position. I have to say, those three picked the wrong man to threaten. They picked the wrong approach," Owen Blackwell replied, his voice carrying the same steady calm she'd heard throughout the incident. "Color of someone's skin doesn't determine their capabilities or their worth. They made assumptions based on prejudice, and those assumptions put them in a position where violence became inevitable." The simplicity of his statement struck Rosa with unexpected force. Here was a man who'd literally dedicated his life to defending American freedoms, who'd earned the nation's highest military honors through courage under fire, and who'd just been subjected to racial intimidation by three criminals who wouldn't qualify to shine his boots. Yet his response was measured analysis rather than anger, professional assessment rather than personal outrage. "Commander, I want you to know that your restraint in this situation was exemplary. Lesser men might have seriously injured those attackers, given their training and the threats involved." Owen Blackwell looked across the parking lot where Rex Malone was finally being loaded into a patrol car, his complaints about police brutality and constitutional rights ringing hollow against the backdrop of witness testimony and physical evidence. "Violence should always be proportional to the threat," he said quietly. "My job is to neutralize problems, not create bigger ones." Rosa found herself nodding in agreement, struck by the contrast between Owen Blackwell's quiet professionalism and Rex Malone's loud victimization claims. The power dynamic that had seemed so clear to the bikers an hour ago, three large men intimidating one isolated individual, had revealed itself to be an illusion built on ignorance and prejudice. As additional officers arrived to process the scene and transport the arrested bikers, Rosa realized she was witnessing something significant. This wasn't just a parking lot altercation gone wrong. It was a perfect example of how assumptions based on appearance and prejudice could lead people to catastrophically misread situations. Rex Malone and his gang had seen a black man standing alone and assumed vulnerability when they were actually confronting one of America's most elite warriors. The afternoon sun beat down on the parking lot as Detective Rosa Figueroa completed her preliminary report, knowing that this incident would be talked about in Millfield for years to come. Owen Blackwell stood quietly nearby, ready to provide any additional information needed, his patience and cooperation a stark contrast to the scene Rex Malone had created during his arrest. The truth was now clear. The Iron Wolves had chosen their target based on racial prejudice and found themselves facing the consequences of that choice, delivered with the precision and restraint that defined America's Special Operations community. Detective Rosa Figueroa stood in the bright afternoon sunlight, her green police shirt crisp against her blue tactical vest, as she surveyed the parking lot that had transformed from a simple grocery store entrance into something far more significant. The overhead fluorescent lights from the store's canopy mixed with natural daylight, casting everything in sharp, clear detail. What had begun as a routine assault investigation was rapidly evolving into something much larger, and her experienced instincts told her they had stumbled onto something important. "Run their names through the system again," she called to Officer Martinez, who was stationed beside his patrol car with its mobile data terminal. "And I want a full background check on all three of these bikers. Something about this whole situation doesn't feel right." Rex Malone sat on the curb, his leather vest torn and his face still bearing the marks of his encounter with Owen Blackwell. Despite his injuries, he continued his attempts to control the narrative, his voice carrying across the parking lot as he spoke to another officer. "I'm telling you, that guy came at us like some kind of maniac. We were just minding our own business when he started throwing punches. You need to arrest him for assault." Tommy Nash, his arm in a makeshift sling after his encounter with Owen Blackwell's precise combat techniques, nodded vigorously despite the obvious pain in his shoulder. "Rex is right, officer. We didn't do nothing to provoke him. He just went crazy on us for no reason." Marvin Cruz, still nursing the effects of the pressure point techniques that had rendered him temporarily helpless, added his voice to the chorus of false testimony. "That man is dangerous. Look what he did to us. We're the victims here." Detective Rosa Figueroa had heard enough false statements in her 15 years of law enforcement to recognize them immediately. The bikers' stories didn't align with the physical evidence, the witness statements, or the calm professional demeanor of Owen Blackwell, who stood nearby in his orange t-shirt and blue jeans, his military bearing evident even in civilian clothes. Officer Martinez looked up from his computer terminal, his expression suddenly alert. "Detective, you need to see this. Rex Malone has 3 outstanding warrants, one for drug trafficking in Nevada, another for aggravated assault in Arizona, and a federal warrant for racketeering charges related to organized crime." The information hit Detective Rosa Figueroa like a revelation, but she maintained her professional composure. Years of police work had taught her that criminals often revealed themselves through their own actions, and this case was proving to be a perfect example. She walked over to where Rex Malone sat, her boots clicking against the asphalt. "Mr. Malone," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just gained significant leverage in the situation. "It appears we have some additional matters to discuss. You have outstanding warrants in multiple jurisdictions." Rex Malone's face went pale beneath his injuries, the tough guy facade beginning to crack as the reality of his situation became clear. "Those are old charges. I don't know what you're talking about. Drug trafficking? Assault? Racketeering?" Detective Rosa Figueroa read from Officer Martinez's report. "The federal warrant alone carries a minimum 10-year sentence, and now you're looking at additional charges for what happened here today." Tommy Nash's eyes widened as Officer Martinez continued his database search. "Detective, Tommy Nash also has warrants: armed robbery in Colorado and assault with a deadly weapon in New Mexico. He's also connected to the same racketeering investigation as Malone." The systematic collapse of their carefully constructed victim narrative was visible in real time. Marvin Cruz shifted nervously, clearly understanding that his own background check would likely yield similar results. The 3 men who had approached Owen Blackwell with such confidence and racist intimidation were being exposed as career criminals with extensive histories of violence and illegal activity. "I want those motorcycles searched," Detective Rosa Figueroa ordered, her training kicking into high gear as she recognized the potential scope of what they had uncovered. "Get the drug detection unit out here and call for additional backup. This is turning into a major bust." Owen Blackwell watched the proceedings with the calm professionalism that had characterized his behavior throughout the entire incident. His military training had taught him to remain composed under pressure, and he observed the unfolding investigation with the detached interest of someone who had seen justice work in various forms across multiple deployments. Mrs. Gladys Pickford, the elderly witness who had observed the entire confrontation from inside the grocery store, approached Detective Rosa Figueroa with additional information. The older woman wore a red blouse that caught the afternoon light, her expression serious but determined. "Detective, I've been watching those motorcycles since before the fight started," Mrs. Gladys Pickford said, her voice clear and strong despite her age. "I saw them tampering with something in their saddlebags right before they approached that nice young man. Something didn't look right about what they were doing." The additional witness testimony provided Detective Rosa Figueroa with probable cause for a thorough search of the motorcycles. She signaled to the officers who were preparing to examine the bikes, knowing that Mrs. Gladys Pickford's observational skills had likely provided them with crucial evidence. Officer Rodriguez, who had arrived with the second wave of backup, began the systematic search of Rex Malone's motorcycle. Within minutes, his search revealed a hidden compartment containing multiple bags of what appeared to be methamphetamine, along with a significant amount of cash in small bills that suggested drug sales. "Detective, we've got narcotics and what looks like drug money," Officer Rodriguez called out, holding up the evidence bags for everyone to see. "This is easily enough for trafficking charges." Tommy Nash's motorcycle yielded even more disturbing evidence. Officer Chen discovered an illegal sawed-off shotgun hidden beneath the seat, along with ammunition and additional drug paraphernalia that suggested a mobile criminal operation. "Illegal weapons, drugs, and cash," Detective Rosa Figueroa announced, her voice carrying across the parking lot so that everyone present could understand the true nature of the men who had confronted Owen Blackwell. "These aren't just assault charges anymore. We're looking at federal weapons violations, drug trafficking, and racketeering." Marvin Cruz's motorcycle completed the trifecta of criminal evidence. Officer Williams found stolen credit cards, false identification documents, and a notebook containing what appeared to be detailed records of drug transactions and criminal activities across multiple states. Rex Malone's attempt to portray himself as a victim had backfired in spectacular fashion. Instead of facing simple assault charges related to their confrontation with Owen Blackwell, the three bikers were now looking at serious federal crimes that could result in decades in prison. "You can't use that evidence," Rex Malone protested weakly, his voice lacking the confidence and aggression he had displayed earlier. "You didn't have the right to search our bikes." Detective Rosa Figueroa smiled grimly as she reviewed the mounting evidence against the Iron Wolves. "Mr. Malone, your outstanding warrants gave us every right to search those motorcycles, and the witness testimony about suspicious behavior provided additional probable cause. Everything we found is completely admissible." The transformation in the parking lot was dramatic and complete. What had begun as three confident criminals attempting to intimidate an innocent man had evolved into a major law enforcement operation. Additional police vehicles had arrived, their red and blue lights reflecting off the store windows as officers processed evidence and secured the scene. Nolan Burke, the store manager, who had witnessed the entire confrontation, emerged from the grocery store wearing his green polo shirt and khaki pants. He approached Detective Rosa Figueroa with additional information that would further solidify the case against the bikers. "Detective, our security cameras captured everything," Nolan Burke said, gesturing toward the surveillance equipment mounted above the store entrance. "The whole confrontation is recorded, including the racist language and the threats they made before the physical altercation began. The video evidence would provide irrefutable proof of the bikers' aggressive behavior and racist intimidation, completely undermining their claims of victimhood." Detective Rosa Figueroa knew that between the witness testimony, the physical evidence, the outstanding warrants, and the security footage, they had built an airtight case against the Iron Wolves. Owen Blackwell remained a model of military discipline throughout the evidence discovery process. When Detective Rosa Figueroa approached him for additional statement clarification, he provided clear, concise answers that demonstrated both his professionalism and his complete honesty about the incident. "Commander Blackwell," Detective Rosa Figueroa said, using his military title with obvious respect, "I want to personally apologize for any inconvenience this investigation has caused you. It's clear that you showed remarkable restraint in defending yourself against these individuals." The irony of the situation was not lost on anyone present. Rex Malone and his gang had approached Owen Blackwell based on racist assumptions, believing they could intimidate someone they perceived as vulnerable. Instead, they had confronted one of the military's most elite warriors and exposed their own extensive criminal activities in the process. Paramedic Samuel Briggs, who had been treating the bikers' injuries, shook his head as he observed the evidence being collected. "In 20 years of emergency response, I've never seen criminals dig themselves into a hole this deep," he commented to his partner. They turned a simple confrontation into a federal case. As the handcuffs clicked into place around Rex Malone's wrists, the leader of the Iron Wolves finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. He had awakened a sleeping giant in Owen Blackwell. But more importantly, His own criminal arrogance had led to the exposure of an entire network of illegal activities. Tommy Nash and Marvin Cruz were similarly processed and arrested, their tough guy personas evaporating as the reality of serious prison time became undeniable. The men who had strutted into the grocery store parking lot with racist confidence were now being led away as convicted felons, facing decades behind bars. Detective Rosa Figueroa stood in the afternoon sunlight, surrounded by evidence of one of the most satisfying arrests of her career. Justice was emerging not through coincidence, but through the natural consequences of criminal behavior, meeting an immovable force in Owen Blackwell. The grocery store parking lot had indeed become a crime scene processing center, but not in the way Rex Malone had initially envisioned. Instead of Owen Blackwell being arrested as the aggressor, the three bikers were facing the complete collapse of their criminal enterprise and their freedom. Owen Blackwell watched calmly as his attackers were loaded into separate police vehicles, their racist intimidation and criminal activities finally catching up with them in the most public and humiliating way possible. The warrior's patience and professionalism had been vindicated, while justice prepared to run its course against those who had underestimated him so completely. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grocery store parking lot as the rumble of news vans began drowning out the distant hum of police radios. Word traveled fast in small towns, and when that word involved a decorated Navy SEAL commander single-handedly dismantling a criminal biker gang, it traveled at lightning speed. Tina Yamamoto adjusted her red blazer and smoothed her matching red skirt as she stepped out of Channel 7's news van, her cameraman Jake already shouldering his equipment. At 32, she had covered enough local stories to recognize when something big was brewing, and the energy crackling through the crowd of onlookers told her this was more than just another parking lot scuffle. "Set up over there," she directed Jake, pointing toward a spot that would capture both the crime scene tape and the imposing figure of Owen Blackwell, who stood calmly beside Detective Rosa Figueroa's patrol car. Even from 50 feet away, the man commanded attention. His green military-style t-shirt and dark blue jeans were unremarkable, but everything else about him radiated quiet authority. Detective Rosa Figueroa noticed the news crew's arrival and grimaced slightly. She had been hoping to wrap up the scene before media attention complicated things, but the dispatcher had already fielded 3 calls from other news outlets. The story was getting out whether she liked it or not. "Commander Blackwell," she said, approaching Owen with newfound respect, evident in her tone. "Looks like word's spreading about what happened here. You might want to prepare for some questions." Owen's dark eyes surveyed the growing crowd, taking in the news van, the cluster of curious shoppers, and the handful of teenagers recording everything on their phones. His expression remained neutral, but Detective Rosa Figueroa caught the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested this attention was the last thing he wanted. "I was hoping to avoid this," Owen said quietly, his voice carrying that same controlled calm that had impressed her throughout the entire incident. "But I understand how these things work." Tina Yamamoto made her way through the crowd, her practiced smile already in place. She had done her homework during the drive over, making quick calls to contacts who filled her in on the basic details. Navy SEAL commander, 3 bikers down, criminal warrants. The story was writing itself, but she needed the human element to make it sing. "Commander Blackwell," she called out, extending her hand as she approached. "I'm Tina Yamamoto from Channel 7 News. I was wondering if I could have a few minutes of your time to discuss what happened here today." Owen studied her for a moment, his assessment as thorough as it was. Quick, everything about his posture suggested a man unaccustomed to seeking attention, yet willing to face whatever duty required of him. "I suppose a few questions would be all right," he said finally, shaking her offered hand with a firm grip. "Though I'd prefer to keep this brief." Tina signaled to Jake, who moved into position with practiced efficiency. The camera's red light blinked on, and suddenly Owen Blackwell found himself at the center of what would soon become a media storm. "This is Tina Yamamoto, reporting from Sullivan's Grocery, where just hours ago, a routine shopping trip turned into something extraordinary. I'm here with Navy SEAL Commander Owen Blackwell, who found himself confronted by 3 members of a criminal biker gang." She turned to Owen, her expression serious but encouraging. "Commander, Can you walk us through what happened? Owen's response was measured, professional, and completely devoid of braggadocio. I stopped here to pick up some supplies on my way home from deployment. 3 individuals approached me in the parking lot and began making threatening statements. When they escalated to physical violence, I defended myself using appropriate force. Witnesses say these men made racist comments and assumptions about you before the confrontation turned physical. How did that make you feel? For the first time, something flickered behind Owen's controlled expression. Not anger, but a deep weariness that spoke to experiences far beyond this single incident. Unfortunately, that kind of behavior isn't uncommon, he said quietly. But my training teaches restraint and de-escalation. I gave them multiple opportunities to walk away. They chose not to take them. Jake panned the camera toward the area where Rex Malone and his gang had been loaded into patrol cars an hour earlier. Then back to Owen. The visual contrast was striking. The calm, dignified military commander standing where 3 criminals had been writhing on the pavement. These men, as it turns out, had outstanding warrants for serious crimes, including drug trafficking and assault. Did you sense you were dealing with career criminals? Owen shook his head slightly. I assessed them as threats based on their behavior and statements, not their background. That information came to light later through Detective Figueroa's investigation. Tina found herself impressed, despite her professional skepticism. There was no grandstanding, no attempt to play up the drama for the cameras. This man simply answered questions with the straightforward honesty of someone who had nothing to prove and nothing to hide. One final question, Commander. What would you say to people who might find themselves in similar situations? Avoid confrontation when possible. De-escalate when you can't avoid it. But never let anyone compromise your safety or dignity because of who you are or what they think you represent. The interview concluded, but Tina knew her story was just beginning. The crowd had grown during the filming, and she spotted 2 key witnesses she absolutely had to speak with. The elderly woman in the blue jacket who had been standing near the store entrance and the man in the orange polo shirt she recognized as the store manager. Mrs. Gladys Pickford proved to be a reporter's dream. At 78, she had the sharp memory of a lifelong observer of human nature and the moral clarity of someone who had seen enough injustice to recognize it instantly. That young man, she said, adjusting her blue jacket against the afternoon breeze, showed more restraint and class in 10 minutes than those thugs have shown in their entire lives. They came at him with hate and violence, and he defended himself like a true professional. Jake captured every word as Mrs. Pickford warmed to her subject. I've lived in this town for 45 years, and I know troublemakers when I see them. Those bikers weren't just picking a fight. They were trying to humiliate a good man because of the color of his skin. Well, they got a lesson they won't soon forget. Tina pressed for details. You witnessed the entire confrontation from inside the store? Every second of it. That Commander Blackwell tried everything to avoid violence. He stayed calm while they hurled slurs and threats. Even when they surrounded him, he kept giving them chances to back down. It wasn't until the big one threw that punch that Commander Blackwell defended himself. Mrs. Pickford's eyes flashed with indignation as she recalled the scene. And when he did defend himself, it was like watching a master craftsman at work. No wasted motion, no unnecessary force. He stopped the threat and nothing more. Those criminals are lucky they picked on someone with such discipline and honor. Store manager Nolan Burke echoed these sentiments when Tina tracked him down near the customer service counter. Still wearing his orange polo shirt with the store logo, he had the shell-shocked expression of someone whose quiet Tuesday had exploded into chaos. I've never seen anything like it, he admitted, running a hand through his hair. Commander Blackwell walked in here like any other customer. Polite, quiet, just picking up some basic supplies. Nothing about him screamed elite warrior. You know? Burke glanced toward the parking lot where crime scene tape still fluttered in the breeze. But when those bikers cornered him out there, something changed. Not in an aggressive way, more like watching a professional athlete step onto their field. Suddenly you could see exactly what he was. Someone you absolutely did not want to mess with. Tina scribbled notes as Burke continued his account. The restraint he showed was incredible. I mean, these guys were bigger than him, outnumbered him 3-1. And they came with pure hate. But Commander Blackwell never lost his cool, never used more force than necessary. He could have hurt them much worse than he did. The manager's respect for Owen was obvious as he spoke. After it was over, while we were waiting for police, he actually apologized to me for the disturbance. Can you believe that? A decorated war hero apologizing because some racist criminals forced him to defend himself in my parking lot. As the afternoon wore on, Tina pieced together a narrative that was both compelling and clear-cut. Owen Blackwell emerged as a figure of quiet heroism, a man who had served his country with distinction, who carried himself with humility despite his extraordinary capabilities, and who had shown remarkable restraint when confronted with hatred and violence. The contrast with Rex Malone and his Iron Wolves couldn't have been more stark. As details of their criminal backgrounds emerged, it became clear that their racist intimidation was just the tip of an iceberg that included drug trafficking, assault, and racketeering. These weren't just bullies picking on someone they perceived as vulnerable. They were career criminals whose latest victims had the training and character to fight back effectively. Detective Rosa Figueroa, when approached for comment, was professional, but clearly impressed by Owen's handling of the situation. Commander Blackwell showed exactly the kind of restraint and judgment we hope to see in any confrontation, she said, her detective's badge catching the late afternoon sunlight. He de-escalated when possible, defended himself when necessary, and cooperated fully with our investigation. The fact that his attackers turned out to be wanted criminals with multiple outstanding warrants speaks to his assessment of the threat they represented. The detective's black slacks and short-sleeved uniform shirt were crisp despite the long day, her professional demeanor intact as she fielded questions. I've worked with a lot of military personnel over the years, and Commander Blackwell exemplifies the best of what that training produces: situational awareness, controlled response, and genuine respect for the law. By evening, Tina's story had been filed and was already generating buzz on social media. The video of Owen's calm, professional interview was being shared across platforms, along with Mrs. Pickford's passionate defense and Burke's detailed account of the confrontation. Comments poured in from viewers who saw in Owen Blackwell a figure they could admire, someone who had earned his capabilities through service and sacrifice, who used those skills only when absolutely necessary, and who carried himself with the quiet dignity that had become all too rare in public discourse. Military communities especially rallied around the story. Veterans groups shared the coverage with pride, noting how Owen's conduct under pressure reflected well on all who had worn the uniform. Active duty service members posted their own experiences with similar confrontations, praising Owen's restraint and professionalism. The contrast with Rex Malone's gang became even more pronounced as additional details of their criminal activities emerged. What had started as racist intimidation had exposed a network of illegal activities that law enforcement had been tracking for months. As night fell over the grocery store parking lot, the crime scene tape came down, and normal operations resumed. But the story of what had happened there was just beginning to spread, carrying with it a message about courage, restraint, and the costly mistake of judging people by appearances rather than character. Owen Blackwell had wanted nothing more than to buy some groceries and continue his journey home. Instead, he had become the reluctant center of a story that would resonate far beyond the small town where three criminals learned that their next victim was actually one of America's most elite warriors. The media storm was building, and at its center stood a man whose greatest strength might not have been his devastating combat skills, but his unwavering commitment to using them only when honor and safety demanded nothing less. By morning, the world had changed for Owen Blackwell. What started as a simple confrontation in a grocery store parking lot had exploded across social media platforms, news websites, and military forums nationwide. The video footage captured by bystanders showed crystal-clear images of a composed black man in a green military-style shirt and dark pants, methodically defending himself against three aggressive bikers who had initiated the racist attack. The contrast was stark and undeniable. Owen sat in his hotel room, sunlight streaming through the windows as he scrolled through hundreds of messages flooding his phone. Text after text rolled in from fellow service members, veterans, and complete strangers, expressing support and admiration. His calm demeanor remained unchanged, though he occasionally shook his head at the sheer volume of attention the incident had generated. The hashtag military hero was trending nationally, with thousands of shares showing the confrontation footage alongside Owen's impressive service record. Military communities across social media platforms had rallied around their decorated brother, sharing stories of his leadership, courage, and the respect he commanded among fellow special operations personnel. Comments poured in from active duty SEALs, retired veterans, and military families praising his restraint and professionalism under pressure. A knock at his hotel door interrupted his thoughts. Owen opened it to find Nolan Burke standing in the hallway, wearing a crisp blue button-down shirt and khaki pants, his face beaming with excitement and gratitude. "Commander Blackwell, I hope I'm not disturbing you," Nolan said, his voice filled with genuine warmth. "I wanted to speak with you personally about something important." Owen gestured for him to enter, maintaining his characteristic humble demeanor despite the store manager's obvious enthusiasm. Nolan walked to the center of the bright room, natural light illuminating his sincere expression. "Sir, after everything that happened yesterday, and seeing how you handled yourself with such incredible professionalism, I've made a decision," Nolan continued, his hands clasped respectfully in front of him. "Our store would be honored to provide you with free groceries for life. It's the least we can do for someone who served our country with such distinction and showed such remarkable character in the face of that racist intimidation." Owen raised his hand gently, his voice steady and appreciative. "Mr. Burke, that's incredibly generous, but I can't accept such an offer. I was simply defending myself, nothing more." "Commander, with respect, what you did was much more than self-defense," Nolan replied, his admiration evident. "You showed restraint when most people would have lost control. You protected yourself without causing permanent harm to those criminals. That takes a special kind of training and character." Before Owen could respond, another knock echoed through the room. Owen opened the door to find Mrs. Gladys Pickford, the elderly witness from the store, wearing a bright red cardigan and matching red blouse. Her eyes sparkled with warmth as she held a homemade apple pie, the sweet aroma filling the doorway. "Commander Owen Blackwell, I had to come see you personally," she said, her voice filled with maternal pride. "I've been telling everyone in town about what I witnessed yesterday. You young man are what I call a true gentleman warrior." Owen stepped aside to let her enter, his respect for the elderly woman evident in his careful attention to her comfort. Mrs. Pickford settled into a chair near the window, the morning light highlighting her genuine smile. "I've lived in this town for 67 years, she continued, setting the pie on the small table. "I've seen plenty of troublemakers like those Iron Wolves bikers, causing problems for decent people. But I've never seen anyone handle a dangerous situation with such grace and control. The way you stayed calm while they hurled those horrible racist slurs at you, the way you only used the force necessary to stop them, that's the mark of a true professional." Owen's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Detective Rosa Figueroa's name appeared on the screen, and he excused himself to answer. "Commander Blackwell, I hope you're doing well this morning," Detective Rosa Figueroa said, her voice carrying a tone of professional respect mixed with personal admiration. "I wanted to update you on the case and express something that's been on my mind since yesterday." "Of course, Detective. How can I help you?" "Sir, I've been in law enforcement for 15 years, and I've seen countless confrontations escalate into tragedies because someone didn't know when to stop or how to properly control a situation," she explained, her words carrying the weight of experience. "What you demonstrated yesterday was textbook de-escalation, followed by perfectly measured response. You gave those criminals multiple opportunities to walk away. You used only the force necessary to neutralize the threats, and you immediately stopped when they were no longer able to continue their attack." Owen listened quietly, uncomfortable with the praise, but understanding the detective's professional perspective. "Commander, I've reviewed the footage from multiple angles, interviewed all the witnesses, and consulted with my supervisors." Detective Rosa Figueroa continued, "Your restraint potentially saved lives yesterday. If someone with less training and discipline had been in your position, this could have ended with permanent injuries or worse. Instead, Rex Malone and his gang members are facing justice in the proper legal system rather than in a morgue." As the call ended, Owen returned his attention to his visitors, but his phone immediately began buzzing with notifications from various veterans organizations across the country. The American Legion, Veterans of Foreign Wars, and multiple SEAL veteran groups had reached out expressing their desire to honor Owen at upcoming ceremonies and events. One message particularly caught his attention. It came from the National Navy SEAL Foundation, stating that his handling of the racist confrontation exemplified the values and professionalism that made the SEAL community proud. They requested permission to feature his story in their newsletter as an example of how elite military training translates into responsible citizenship. Owen set his phone aside and focused on Mrs. Gladys Pickford, who was sharing stories about her late husband's military service during the Korean War. "My Harold would have been so proud to meet you," she said, her eyes misty with memory and admiration. "He always said that true warriors fight when they must, but never more than necessary. You honored every veteran yesterday with how you conducted yourself." Meanwhile, across town, the investigation into Rex Malone's Iron Wolves gang was expanding rapidly. Detective Rosa Figueroa had coordinated with federal authorities as evidence of the gang's interstate criminal activities continued surfacing. Their drug trafficking network extended across 3 states, involving numerous crimes that authorities had been investigating for months. The viral attention surrounding Owen's confrontation with the gang had prompted additional witnesses to come forward with information about the Iron Wolves' criminal activities. Business owners reported intimidation tactics, former associates provided details about drug operations, and victims of previous assaults identified gang members from news coverage. Federal agents were conducting raids on properties linked to the organization, uncovering substantial evidence of racketeering, drug distribution, weapons trafficking, and conspiracy charges that would keep Rex Malone and his associates in prison for decades. Owen's phone rang again, this time showing a number from the local news station. Tina Yamamoto had received hundreds of calls from viewers expressing support for Owen and requesting updates on his well-being. "Commander Blackwell, the response to yesterday's story has been overwhelming," Tina said, her professional excitement evident. "We've received calls from military families, community leaders, and citizens expressing gratitude for your service and admiration for your character. Would you be willing to provide a brief statement acknowledging this support?" Owen considered the request carefully, understanding that his response would reach thousands of people but remaining true to his humble nature. "Ms. Yamamoto, I appreciate the kind words from everyone, but I want to be clear about something important," Owen replied, his voice steady and sincere. "I'm not a hero for defending myself against criminals. The real heroes are the service members currently deployed overseas, the law enforcement officers like Detective Rosa Figueroa, who work every day to keep communities safe, and the witnesses like Mrs. Gladys Pickford and Mr. Nolan Burke, who chose to speak the truth rather than remain silent." His words, when broadcast later that evening, only increased public admiration for his character and humility. As the afternoon progressed, Owen received a call from his commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Chester Albright, updating him on the military community's response to the incident. "Owen, I've fielded calls from Pentagon brass, SEAL team commanders, and veteran organizations all day," Lieutenant Colonel Chester Albright reported, his pride evident. "Everyone wants to commend how you represented the Navy and Special Operations community. You've reminded the entire country what military professionalism looks like under pressure." Owen deflected the praise as always, but he understood the broader significance of the incident. In an era when military and civilian relations sometimes faced challenges, his conduct had demonstrated the values, training, and character that defined America's elite warriors. By evening, Rex Malone's criminal empire was crumbling. Federal prosecutors were preparing cases that would dismantle the Iron Wolves organization permanently, using evidence gathered over months of investigation combined with new information prompted by the viral confrontation. Owen Blackwell sat in his hotel room as the sun set, reading messages from military communities, grateful civilians, and fellow veterans who saw in his actions a reflection of the values they held dear. Tomorrow he would continue his journey home, but tonight he reflected on how a simple grocery store stop had become a reminder that character, training, and restraint could triumph over hatred and criminality. The community had learned something valuable about judging people by their actions rather than assumptions. While 3 criminals discovered the costly mistake of underestimating a true professional warrior. 3 weeks after the parking lot confrontation that shook the quiet town of Millbrook, the courthouse steps buzzed with activity as Rex Malone shuffled forward in orange prison garb, his hands cuffed behind his back. The same man who had strutted across that grocery store parking lot with racist arrogance now kept his eyes fixed on the ground, his leather jacket and intimidating presence replaced by the uniform of the convicted. Judge Margaret Thornfield's voice carried across the packed courtroom as she delivered the sentences that would dismantle the Iron Wolves forever. Rex Malone, for charges of assault, drug trafficking, illegal weapons possession, and racketeering, this court sentences you to 15 years in federal prison without possibility of parole for 8 years. The gavel's bang echoed like thunder. Rex Malone's shoulders sagged as the weight of his choices crushed down upon him. The man who had assumed he could intimidate and terrorize based on the color of someone's skin now faced the consequences of a lifetime spent choosing hatred over humanity. Tommy Nash received 12 years for his role as lieutenant in the criminal enterprise, while Marvin Cruz faced 10 years behind bars. Their motorcycles had been seized, their drug operation dismantled, and their reign of intimidation permanently ended. The 3 men who had approached Owen Blackwell, believing they held all the power, now understood the true meaning of powerlessness. Detective Rosa Figueroa stood outside the courthouse, her badge gleaming in the afternoon sunlight as she addressed the gathered media. She wore her dark blue uniform with pride, her posture reflecting the professionalism that had guided her investigation from the beginning. "Justice has been served today," Detective Rosa Figueroa announced, her voice carrying the authority earned through years of dedicated service. "But this case represents something larger than just criminal convictions. It shows what happens when we make assumptions based on prejudice instead of character." She paused, looking directly into the cameras. Commander Owen Blackwell demonstrated extraordinary restraint and professionalism throughout this ordeal. He showed us what true strength looks like, both in defending himself when attacked and in how he conducted himself afterward. Miles away, Owen Blackwell stood in his hotel room, adjusting the collar of his navy blue dress uniform. The ribbons across his chest told the story of a lifetime dedicated to service, each decoration representing missions where he had placed others' safety above his own. He had agreed to one final public appearance before continuing his journey home, though the attention still felt uncomfortable for someone trained to operate in the shadows. A knock at his door interrupted his preparations. When he opened it, Lieutenant Colonel Chester Albright stood in the hallway, his own dress uniform impeccable, his bearing reflecting decades of military leadership. The silver oak leaves on his shoulders caught the overhead fluorescent lighting as he extended his hand. "Commander Blackwell," Lieutenant Colonel Chester Albright said, his voice carrying both warmth and official authority. "I flew in personally because this situation required the presence of your commanding officer." Owen Blackwell stepped aside to welcome his superior into the modest hotel room. "Sir, I appreciate you making the trip, but this was just an unfortunate incident that got blown out of proportion." Lieutenant Colonel Chester Albright's weathered face broke into a slight smile. "Owen, you've spent so many years in classified operations that you've forgotten how to recognize when you've done something worthy of public recognition. What happened in that parking lot wasn't just self-defense. It was a masterclass in military bearing under civilian pressure." He moved to the window, looking out at the town that had been transformed by Owen Blackwell's brief presence. "You represented every value we instill in our special operations personnel: restraint under provocation, precision when action became necessary, humility in the aftermath. You showed this community what American warriors truly represent." Owen Blackwell remained standing at attention, though his commanding officer's informal tone suggested he could relax. "I just responded to the situation as my training dictated, sir." "Exactly," Lieutenant Colonel Chester Albright replied. "And that training, that character, that commitment to doing what's right, even when facing hatred and prejudice, that's what makes you one of our most valuable commanders. The Pentagon has been following this story, Owen. Your conduct has reflected positively on the entire special operations community." Across town, the Millbrook Community Center hummed with preparation, as Mrs. Gladys Pickford supervised the decoration of the main hall. The elderly woman moved with surprising energy, her blue jacket pristine as she directed volunteers in hanging banners and arranging folding chairs. Her gray hair was perfectly styled for the occasion, and her eyes sparkled with the satisfaction of organizing something meaningful. No, the banner needs to be centered over the stage, she instructed two younger volunteers. Commander Blackwell deserves our very best effort today. Store manager Nolan Burke approached carrying a rectangular package wrapped in brown paper. His orange polo shirt and khaki pants were freshly pressed for the ceremony, and his usually business-focused expression had softened into something approaching reverence. Mrs. Pickford, Nolan Burke said, setting down his package carefully. The plaque arrived this morning. I think Commander Blackwell will be pleased. Mrs. Gladys Pickford's eyes lit up as she examined the bronze plaque that would be installed at the grocery store entrance. The inscription read, "In grateful recognition of Commander Owen Blackwell, United States Navy SEALs, whose courage, character, and service exemplify the finest values of American heroism, dedicated by the grateful citizens of Millbrook." "Perfect," she whispered, running her finger along the engraved letters. "That young man showed us what real strength looks like, and this community will never forget it." The ceremony began at 2 o'clock sharp, with the community center packed beyond capacity. Citizens who had only heard about the parking lot confrontation sat beside those who had witnessed it firsthand. Veterans from 3 different wars occupied the front rows, their aged faces reflecting pride in a younger warrior who had upheld their traditions. Mayor Patricia Holbrook, dressed in a professional red blazer that reflected her office's dignity, stepped to the podium as the crowd settled into respectful silence. Her voice carried clearly through the hall's sound system as she began the proceedings. 3 weeks ago, our community witnessed something that challenged our assumptions and reminded us of our values, Mayor Patricia Holbrook began. A decorated military commander passing through our town was subjected to racist intimidation and physical assault. His response taught us lessons about character, restraint, and true strength that will resonate for generations. She gestured toward the side entrance where Owen Blackwell waited with Lieutenant Colonel Chester Albright. Today we have the honor of recognizing Commander Owen Blackwell, not just for his distinguished military service, but for representing the finest qualities of American character under the most challenging circumstances. The applause began as Owen Blackwell entered the hall, his dress uniform drawing murmurs of appreciation from the assembled crowd. He moved with the controlled precision that marked him as special operations, his bearing reflecting years of leadership in the world's most elite military unit. Lieutenant Colonel Chester Albright followed, carrying a presentation case that held Owen Blackwell's commendation from the Department of Defense. The official recognition had been fast-tracked through military channels, reflecting the significance of the incident's positive outcome. As Owen Blackwell reached the podium, the applause intensified. Mrs. Gladys Pickford dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, while Nolan Burke stood with his hand over his heart. Detective Rosa Figueroa, present in her dress uniform, nodded approvingly at the community's response. "Thank you," Owen Blackwell said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had commanded respect in combat zones around the world. "I'm humbled by this reception, though I want to be clear that I simply responded to a situation as any service member would." He paused, scanning the crowd of faces that reflected genuine admiration and gratitude. What happened in that parking lot wasn't about me displaying some special ability. It was about standing up to hatred and intimidation, something every person in this room has the power to do. Lieutenant Colonel Chester Albright stepped forward, opening the presentation case to reveal a gleaming commendation medal. "Commander Owen Blackwell, by direction of the Secretary of Defense, and in recognition of your exemplary conduct, while representing the United States military in civilian circumstances, you are hereby awarded the Defense Superior Service Medal." The medal's ribbon displayed the colors that represented service above self, and as Lieutenant Colonel Chester Albright pinned it to Owen Blackwell's uniform, the crowd rose in spontaneous standing ovation. The applause continued for nearly 2 minutes, reflecting a community's gratitude for a man who had shown them the meaning of true heroism. Mrs. Gladys Pickford approached the microphone next, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. Commander Blackwell, on behalf of everyone in Millbrook, I want you to know that you've changed us. You showed us what it means to judge people by their character rather than their appearance. You demonstrated that real strength comes from restraint and wisdom, not aggression and hatred. She gestured toward the bronze plaque that would be mounted at the grocery store. This plaque will remind future generations that heroes walk among us. And sometimes they're just stopping by for groceries on their way home from protecting our freedom. The laughter that rippled through the crowd carried warmth and affection, reflecting the genuine connection this community had formed with a man they had known for less than a month. Detective Rosa Figueroa took the podium to deliver the final official recognition. Commander Blackwell, the Millbrook Police Department wants to commend your cooperation during our investigation and your exemplary conduct throughout this entire incident. You turned what could have been a tragic situation into a teachable moment about justice, character, and community. She presented him with an honorary deputy's badge, a gesture that symbolized law enforcement's respect for his handling of the confrontation. We hope you'll consider Millbrook a second home, and know that you have the gratitude and support of every officer in our department. As the ceremony concluded, Owen Blackwell found himself surrounded by well-wishers who wanted to shake his hand, take photos, and express their personal thanks. Children asked for autographs, veterans shared stories of their own service, and ordinary citizens simply wanted to be in the presence of someone who had demonstrated extraordinary character under pressure. An hour later, Owen Blackwell stood beside his rental car in the same grocery store parking lot where the confrontation had begun. The bronze plaque had already been mounted near the entrance, its polished surface reflecting the afternoon sunlight. The spot where Rex Malone had first approached him now seemed like a different world, transformed by justice and community recognition. Mrs. Gladys Pickford approached one final time, carrying a small wrapped package. Her blue jacket was the same one she had worn as a witness to the original confrontation, but her expression now reflected peace rather than concern. Commander Blackwell, she said, extending the package. This is just a little something from the neighborhood. We wanted you to have a reminder of your time here, though I suspect you won't need help remembering us. Inside the package, Owen Blackwell found a hand-carved wooden medallion featuring the Navy SEAL trident, surrounded by the words Millbrook's hero. The craftsmanship was clearly the work of someone who had invested significant time and care in its creation. "Ma'am," Owen Blackwell said, his usually controlled voice carrying genuine emotion. "This means more to me than any official recognition. Thank you for seeing past the surface to the person underneath." Mrs. Gladys Pickford smiled, patting his arm with grandmotherly affection. "Young man, that's exactly what you taught us to do. Now you drive safely on your way home, and remember that you've got family here in Millbrook whenever you need us." As Owen Blackwell drove away from the town that had embraced him, he reflected on the events that had transformed a simple grocery store stop into a life-changing experience. In his rearview mirror, he could see the community center where citizens had gathered to honor him, the grocery store where justice had been served, and the courthouse where hatred had faced consequences. Rex Malone and his Iron Wolves had learned that intimidation and racism carried a price they couldn't afford to pay. The community of Millbrook had discovered that heroes came in many forms, and true strength was measured by character rather than appearance. And Owen Blackwell had been reminded that his years of service protecting American values had meaning beyond the classified missions and dangerous operations that filled his military record. The road stretched ahead toward home, but behind him lay a town forever changed by the encounter between a decorated warrior and the criminals who had catastrophically misjudged their target. Justice had been served, honor had been restored, and a community had learned to see past prejudice to the character that truly defined a person's worth. You just heard a story that history tried to overlook. If it stayed with you, take a second to stand with it. Subscribe, share, and help us keep telling the stories that deserve light, not silence.